everybody. Right, we're going to look now at something a little bit more specific about Act 3, Scene 4, and that's the way it's structured and how the structure of Act 3, Scene 4 fits into the play of Macbeth as a whole. And so we're going to be using some quite fancy vocabulary in today's lesson. So let's just go through that. So the first term is Hamartia. The second term is peripeteia, and both of these words come from ancient Greek. A guy called Aristotle who wrote a kind of a literary criticism called poetics, and those were two terms that he introduced there for analysing drama. And the next two terms you're probably familiar with: rising action and the climax of a piece of literature. And the last word, again, probably familiar with, but we're going to go through it anyway, and that's the term protagonist. Okay, so starting off with the term protagonist, a protagonist for me is a more useful term for the main character in a play or a novel. And you can see a picture of Michael Fassbender there in one of the versions of Macbeth that we've seen. And he kind of looks quite heroic because in that picture he's about to go into battle. But in Macbeth as a whole, it would be really difficult to describe the character of Macbeth as a hero all the way through the play, because his behaviour gets less and less heroic as the play goes on. And that's why the term protagonist is really, really useful. You can see that the word pro means for. We often use the word pro to mean for, and it is a character that on the whole we are for him. We kind of get behind him and we're on his side. But when Macbeth's behavior starts getting really, really bad, our loyalty goes away from him. And that's why protagonist is a more useful term than hero, because as I said before, Macbeth certainly doesn't remain a hero throughout the whole play. Yeah, I think arguably we could say that he is the protagonist. He's the main character, and we get behind him or we're disappointed when he makes bad choices. So protagonist is a term that I'm going to use to describe Macbeth today. The next term which I've put up there in that key vocabulary is hamartia. And hamartia is the ancient Greek word, spelt here in a normal alphabet, for the protagonist's fatal flaw. And you'll see it often in lots of literature, especially American study guides, being described as a tragic flaw rather than a fatal flaw. But fatal is important because it's got that word fate in it. This idea in ancient drama that the protagonist's outcome is determined by fate, and whatever you try to do to avoid your fate, you can't avoid it. Your fate will catch up with you in the end. And that's what I prefer the meaning of hamartia to be, the fatal flaw rather than the tragic flaw. So in my words, what this means is the hamartia is a problem with a character's personality, and that means that that character will be drawn inevitably towards their fate, whether that's for good or for bad. So you can see the definition below as well and how to pronounce it. So hamartia, and the character defect that causes the downfall of the protagonist of a tragedy, the tragic flaw. So that's what hamartia means, and you'll see why we need that in a moment. Okay, so what is Macbeth's fatal flaw? What's his hamartia? Most literary critics will argue that Macbeth's fatal flaw is excessive ambition. He's too ambitious. I'm not always convinced that ambition is the worst flaw in Macbeth's personality. His wife is excessively ambitious for him. Lady Macbeth wants him to be more the man, more than what he is at the moment. But most study guides, most revision guides, most literary critics will start with the idea that Macbeth's fatal flaw, his hamartia, is ambition. And you need to make your mind up. And if you're writing an essay about Macbeth, you'd probably want to start with the idea that it is ambition, excessive ambition, trying to fulfill his ambition too quickly that causes his fall. However, I've had other critics, and some of these I definitely believe as well, will argue that his fatal flaw, his hamartia, might be one of these. So it could be the fact that he has a lust for blood. He loves killing too much. He's been raised in what's known as a martial society, a society where the people value military strength, soldiering, that kind of battlefield heroics more than any other character flaw. And then Macbeth is just kind of a victim of being brought up to believe in that martial state. So he's got this bloodlust. He believes that all his problems can be solved just by slaughtering people. The next one, which I probably agree with most, is his gullibility. He doesn't seem to have a really, really high IQ. He needs instructions from other people to make the right choice. And when he's following someone else's instructions, like Duncan's in battle or Lady Macbeth's in the murder of Duncan, everything seems to go really, really well. When he starts making his own decisions, not so much. So I think gullibility, so not being so bright, but also believing what he is told. He believes the witches, he goes back to the witches, he doesn't understand the way that the witches are playing with language to manipulate him. So I think gullibility is a real flaw in Macbeth's personality. He's not the brightest, and he believes literally too much of what he's told. You could certainly argue, and these two kind of mash together in a way, that mental instability is Macbeth's tragic flaw, his hamartia. He struggles to sleep when he has worries on his mind. He is obsessed with worries. My mind is full of scorpions, dear wife. He says he's always worrying. Fear is always nagging at him. The paranoia that we see, the lack of sleep that grows. And I think that this paranoia and the lack of sleep and his mental instability all lead up to his inability to trust anybody. And in a way, that's almost the opposite of King Duncan, isn't it? You could argue that King Duncan's tragic flaw is he just trusted everybody. He had so much trust. So Duncan was kind of gullible as well. But whilst Macbeth's gullibility is linked together with no trust in anybody, Duncan's gullibility was linked into the fact that he believed everybody, trusted everybody. Okay, so have a little think about which of those you agree with. Is Macbeth's hamartia his fatal flaw? Is it ambition, or do you think it's something else? Okay, so Act 3, Scene 4 marks the climax of the play. So I whacked up the old story mountain, or Freytag's pyramid, or whatever you'd like to call it, the basic plot structure of any narrative, whether it's a play or a novel. And this is where we are. And if you have a look, Act 3 is just off the middle of the play. If you were to open the play as a book, there it falls just after the middle. And in our picture, that's just where it comes as well. So it's the climax of the play, another piece of our key vocabulary. And why is it the climax? Well, he's achieved what he set out for. So he should be at the height of his powers. He's King of Scotland now. He's celebrating with a feast, this first formal occasion as king. And he really should be enjoying his power, enjoying his guests, all the noblest people in Scotland around him. He should be having the time of his life, really. He should be enjoying that moment. However, if we have a look at the rising action, it says here, conflict, struggles, blocks to the goal or journey. Are his conflicts and struggles over? No, they're not. Banquo is about to come back and haunt him. And this really, really messes up the climax, the time that Macbeth should be enjoying himself. Have the blocks to his goal been removed? Well, he thought he'd removed Banquo, but Banquo's popped in again as a ghost or as a figment of Macbeth's imagination. Are we ready for the falling action now? Character reactions, mysteries solved, loose ends tied up, final brief conflict may take place, prepares reader for the end. Are we into the aftermath? No, in a way, we've still got more rising action to come. We still have more conflicts with Macduff. We've still got more struggles and more blocks on the goal to his journey, and also not just the journey of enjoying his kingship, but the journey of settling in to being king and sorting out his head. So maybe we're not ready for the falling action, although clearly we are at the climactic point and there is more conflict to come, which we'll talk about and you can think about in a bit. Okay, so the final little piece of vocab which I mentioned is peripeteia. Peripeteia, again, another Greek word from Aristotle's Poetics. And what peripeteia means is a reversal of fortunes. So far, Macbeth's been enjoying everything and everything has been going right for him. You can see the witch's prophecies have come true. Yay. He got away with killing King Duncan. He seems to have got away with it. And the only person who suspected him is Banquo, and he slaughtered Banquo, or his murderers have. Malcolm and Dollenbane, they've run away. They've fled to England and to Ireland. And now it seems like they're the ones who are guilty. So it seems like everything is going right for Macbeth. He's achieved kingship of Scotland without too much problem. However, because it's a tragedy, when you get to the climax, the protagonist faces peripeteia, the reversal of fortunes. What that means for Macbeth is things are going to start to go wrong. And right from the beginning of that party, that feast, that banquet, things start to go wrong for Macbeth. The murderer comes in, and the first thing that goes wrong, arguably, is a murderer has blood on his face, so it's going to cast suspicions amongst the people who are there, the other guests who are there, if they see him having this quiet conversation with a murderer who's still got blood on his face. That's not great. The second thing that goes wrong, he finds out that Fleance has escaped. He bats that off in Act 3, Scene 4 for now. He says, I'll worry about that later. He's not a threat to me at the moment. I'll worry about that later. But then, of course, the big thing that happens in Act 3, Scene 4 is this ghost of Banquo turns up. Banquo's soul can't go straight to heaven. So he's come back to haunt Macbeth, to spoil Macbeth's celebration, and to put the spanner in the works to mess things up for Macbeth, to start off this reversal of fortune, this peripeteia. So things from now on are going to go badly wrong for Macbeth. The other point about the climax, if you think about movies that you might watch nowadays, like say an action adventure movie, the climax is going to be, say, like something like the Fast and the Furious, for example, massive car chase, ending up probably with like some parkour and some fist fighting, and that's going to be like the really big set piece in a blockbuster Hollywood movie. In Shakespeare's day, we've got this set piece drama, the appearance of Banquo's ghost, which is going to delight the audience. And so this idea that they're using some of the very few special effects that they had, the trapdoor under the stage, and the ghost is coming and then the ghost is going, and we can see the ghost, Macbeth can see the ghost, but none of the other guests can see the ghost. And as I discussed in the previous video, it's a really interesting piece of pantomime almost for the audience. So that's really important for the climax, the turning point. And it is when you go and see Macbeth, and you go to the theatre to see Macbeth, you really, as an audience member, if you know the play really well, this is a scene that you're looking forward to because it's really entertaining and you kind of want to shout out, the ghost is behind you. So that's why it's really important as well from an audience perspective. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about in this structure is Macbeth's downfall. And obviously this follows on from the idea of Peripeteia. So in Peripeteia, his fortunes are reversed. Everything's been going well, but now everything's going to start going badly. I want you to pause this video and I want you to try and come up with everything that goes wrong for Macbeth following Act 3, Scene 4. Try and list everything that goes wrong for him. And then after you've listed it, maybe try and put it into chronological order. I probably spent about 3 or 4 minutes on this. Don't want you to spend longer. It's just a case of revising your subject knowledge and your knowledge of the play. So pause the video for about 3 or 4 minutes. See if you can come up with about 6 things that go wrong for Macbeth before I tell you what I put down for this one. Okay, here you go. Here are my quick ideas, as I said. So there probably are more than these. Not sure, I've got about 8. And so, the first thing that goes wrong is that the witches absolutely trick Macbeth by using equivocation. They use language in deliberately ambiguous ways to try and fool and trick Macbeth and make him believe that he's safe when really he is not safe at all. And next thing, Macbeth makes a really, really bad decision, a really cowardly decision, and he slaughters Macduff's entire family. And what that does is it gives Macduff a worthy cause for vengeance. As an audience, we've been behind Macbeth. He's our protagonist, but now even audience loyalty is going to shift to Macduff. We're like, Macbeth has gone too far now. But what this also means is many people who have supported Macbeth up to this point within the plot, within the narrative, they're going to lose all respect for him. And as we see really, really clearly in the Polanski version of the film, many of Macbeth's supporters desert him. They leave his castle and they withdraw support. Maybe they go and join Macduff, maybe they just get to safety somewhere in Scotland. Now, meanwhile, in England, King Duncan's eldest son forms an alliance with the King of England, who is King Edward, aka Edward the Confessor. And King Edward provides for Malcolm English soldiers that he can take into battle to challenge Macbeth. So Macbeth doesn't know that that's going on. Remember, he keeps ripping up all the reports that are coming back to him from his spies and people in England. Doesn't want to acknowledge that's going on. He ignores it, so he doesn't know that that's happening. Similarly, Macduff, who has fled to, well, kind of moved to England, not so much fled. Remember, he left his family like unprotected in Scotland. That was a bit foolish. Macduff forms an alliance with Malcolm. Lady Macbeth, back in Scotland, goes insane, starts sleepwalking, and then she dies. It's kind of the great woman behind the power of Macbeth, loses her mind, and then she loses her life. Then we see the trees which appear to be moving towards Macbeth's castle as the soldiers use the branches to camouflage themselves. The English and the Scottish rebels camouflage themselves, and this serves to fulfill one of the witch's prophecies. Next prophecy is fulfilled because Macduff reveals in battle, in hand-to-hand combat, that he was born by caesarean section, so not a woman born. The equivocation on that word woman, meaning womanly parts, the birth canal, rather than an actual physical woman. And then finally, Macduff kills Macbeth. It's almost as if the play comes full circle at that point, because that's really, really similar to the execution of the Thane of Cawdor, which we saw, or which we heard about right at the beginning of the play. A battle ending in the execution of the Thane of Cawdor, and everything's come round back to the beginning again. So those are all my points about the kind of the big structure of the play. And you can see, hopefully, that Act 3, Scene 4 is absolutely crucial to the structure of the play. And if in your exam you did have an extract from Act 3, Scene 4, apart from analysing the language, that would be a very, very important thing to talk about. You could probably write a whole couple of paragraphs about that. And those of you aiming for the highest marks could certainly throw in some of that Greek literature, that Greek literary terminology that we've discussed today. I shall see you next time for some Macbeth Act 5.